Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talk, a show where we talk about the stories of people living in Taiwan and Taiwanese living abroad. I'm Trevor Tortomasi, and joining me in the studio today is Sam Yarbs of 2-3 Comedy. Sam has written for the Night show here in Taiwan, Ye Ye Show. He has also hosted countless stand-up shows all around Taipei and Taiwan, and he has participated in international comedy competitions. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, man.
Absolutely, man.
ICRT, we made it.
We made it.
2-3 Comedies on ICRT, man. Nice.
Starting off, I'm curious, how did 2-3 Comedy Club get started in Taipei?
So I was living in Kaohsiung. I started doing comedy when I lived down in Kaohsiung with a good friend of mine, Rob Stocky. And we were doing comedy down there, and he was ready to move back to the US. He was ready to make a run at it. And I knew I wanted to stay in Taiwan, and I moved up to Taipei because at the time, there wasn't much going on in the stand-up scene in Kaohsiung. We had a weekly mic that was very poorly attended, and I knew Taipei was the place for English language comedy to come up. And so when I moved up here with a friend of mine, Meg Anderson, we started 2-3 Comedy together. At that point, 2-3 Comedy is separate from the club. It was just a Facebook page, a group that we organized shows kind of under this umbrella.
And what year was that?
That was in, oh geez, man. Let's see, the club's been open 2 years, probably 2 years before that. So 2018, 2017, 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, around then, yeah. And so at that point, we were doing our shows in the basement of 23 Public, which is a bar near the Taipower MRT station. And the kind of goal that I had, because there already was comedy going on in Taipei at the time. There was a group that were doing shows, but they had this kind of like loose organization where people would do shows like at different bars and there'd be different hosts. And it was kind of hard to know like where shows work. They would pop up everywhere and then maybe disappear for a month, depending on who was running the show. And I wanted there to be like one home for comedy. If you come here every Monday, you're gonna see an open mic. And 23 Public very generously allowed us to use their space. And so because, again, we're trying to forge that connection, come here for comedy, 23 Public, we chose the name 2-3 Comedy. So it was directly taken from our partnership early on with 23 Brew Company.
So on your Facebook page, 2-3 Comedy's Facebook page, the most commonly asked questions are, what's the schedule? What's the menu? Normal questions. And then how can I see Brian? Brian Sungbo. He's pretty famous. I'm curious. I have to ask about him. Like, how did you guys get to know each other? And what's his
I actually
role?
brought him here. He's no, he's
in your pocket.
Yeah, sorry guys. Yeah. So I knew Brian going back to before starting 2-3 Comedy. When I was living in Kaohsiung, and I was introduced. He was like this young kid. He wants to try English stand-up, and he was doing spots at the same shows as us. The same thing, like 8-minute spots here and there. And at that point, he wasn't doing anything in Chinese. He was just doing English stand-up. So I built a friendship with him over the years. We just would do shows together for a long time. And then when we started 2-3, at that point, he was by then probably one of the best English comics, again, doing it in English. And so I would try to get him in every show. And at a certain point, he filmed a set of his, I think it was at Comedy Base, where he performed. And that clip ended up getting like 3 million views in like a couple days or something like that. And from then, it was just this snowball of momentum. And he was hosting Chinese language open mics at that point. So we'd expanded from just English to Chinese mics as well, still in that 23 Public space.
Right now, I think the advantage of working with Brian is probably that he has a deep connection to the larger language base here in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And so having a place like 2-3 Comedy where you can have English language comedy, which is succeeding in its own audience, and Chinese language comedy.
Yeah.
How has it felt, I guess, the simplest question, to have a bilingual comedy club?
Well, it feels completely natural because, I mean, it reflects kind of the evolution of where we started. We started with an English language open mic. We added the Chinese language open mic. And that was really when you saw Chinese language comedy really kind of take off. And a lot of it is attributed directly to Brian and his success. But when you look at the wider landscape now, it's not just Brian. So for 2-3, where we kind of fit in, it's true that we're a bilingual club, but if you go to 2-3, you might not necessarily have a bilingual experience.
That's fair, yeah.
English nights are in English. We've done, I think, in our history, maybe 4 shows where Brian and I host together that are truly bilingual shows. And
it's got a really unique audience. It's a hard target to hit. So.
It's very, and I don't think we've ever really charged tickets for them either. It's a very, normally you have to have lots of comics doing short sets in their language, because if you came for Chinese and you're hearing someone do 10 minutes in English, just tuning out. It's
Yeah.
not enjoyable. And then, as a comic, if you're watching somebody kill or they're crushing in Chinese, you're like, oh, they're not gonna like my English at all. It's a bummer. So you got to keep it quick and make it like game based. So most nights, an English night's gonna be an English show. Brian's night, you're not gonna see anyone doing anything in English there. So the ownership, the structure, the idea behind it is bilingual, and but the execution on a given night is going to be Chinese or English, depending. I should say FIG, the improv group, they do bilingual stuff. They're truly bilingual. Nice. Yeah, they're good up there and jibber jabber.
So there's a clear division for audiences to know what they're looking for there. But in having two different like languages going on over the course of a week, you have some English language nights where your local comics are performing in not their native language, and vice versa. Have you performed in Chinese before?
Yes. Saying that I have performed comedy in Chinese is insulting to both Chinese and comedy, but I have gone on stage with a microphone and attempted to get through 5-minute sets. For a while, I convinced myself that I was getting better at it. And I remember I did one open mic that Brian actually hosted. And afterwards, he asked the audience to raise their hand if anybody understood a word I said. And only 2 people raised their hand. And they were both people I had talked to in English during my set. So I was like, oh, I kind of realized, at a certain point, obviously it's fun. I don't think anyone minds you trying, but it's become so popular that if I were to go to a Chinese mic now, I would be taking somebody's spot who really deserves a chance to be there. So I want to try again in the future, but
you can make it as short as you want, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I could pop up for 30 seconds, I guess, and that'd be one way to spend a Tuesday night, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. But it's interesting because every comic who is truly bilingual, like Brian's truly bilingual. He grew up, he spent a significant time in the U.S. and Taiwan. He speaks both fluently, and he's told me multiple times, it's like, well, you cannot just translate a joke. If you have a joke in English, you cannot go word for word, this means this means this. You can take a premise and apply it to the other language. You can be like, this is fun. Funny is still funny, but you have to approach it just grammatically, conceptually from an entirely different angle. Yeah. And the idea that you're going to go up there with, I'm going to write my English set in pinyin down and be like, it's not, at that point, it's not comedy. And some of the laughs you're eliciting are because of how bad your Chinese is, which is a crutch that you can use for a little bit, but I don't think anybody.
It's not scalable, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's very limited. Yeah, again, like 5 minutes of that may be cute once a week.
I'd like to get your opinion too on like what jokes have you seen work in English but not in Chinese? Maybe even if you didn't understand it, have you heard about like what seems to translate well or doesn't translate?
Like in terms of like topics or subject matter kind of, or just like that. It's interesting. And that's an interesting question because this is one I get asked all the time in different interviews. It's kind of like, the crux of it is kind of what you're asking is like, do Taiwanese audiences understand the English humor or whatever like that? Or do they just like to hear people joke about things in Taiwan or whatever like that? And it's just, the range of different styles of comedy is so broad that it's really impossible to narrow down, and also I think that it's a mistake to target and say that the Taiwanese audience is monolithic because Brian averages a much younger audience. There's another comedian, Taiwanese comedian named Jim, who does very, very dark jokes. Think of like Anthony Jeselnik, whatever like that. His audience, you can see a lot more, tends to be a little more male heavy, maybe a little bit older. But one of the interesting things you mentioned about like the approach for the club though, there is one thing that I think that Brian brought when he started doing the Chinese mic. And again, I don't want to speak for the history of Chinese language comedy in Taiwan, but there is a Chinese history of comedy that's outside of the Western framework of stand-up. Stand-up comedy is a Western art form. It emerged out of vaudeville. You can trace a line from, Bob Hope through Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, Richard Pryor, into Chris Rock, Chappelle, Louis C.K. Bob. You can draw a line. I'm sorry, I just named all male comics. I'm sorry. Jessica Kirsten, hilarious. But you could draw a straight line and kind of progress this. There's outside of that exists a history of Chinese language comedy. Crosstalk would be the most popular one that's known, where you have the 2 people on stage going back and forth. And some of Taiwanese early comedy definitely developed out of that. If you watch Taiwanese variety shows today, those are so clearly influenced by crosstalk. And so Chinese language open mics before were very kind of free-flowing in terms of what you'd expect at a stand-up comedy open mic. Yeah. You might have a guy go up for his first time and do a 15-minute story. And there's no punchlines along the way, but the ending might be a funny story, and that's like, in English, you're getting the light after 4 minutes. You're like, dude, jokes. And Brian kind of brought that expectation to his mics. He would tell comics, he's like, you need to tell jokes. There's a laughs per minute thing. These are kind of targets that we have when we're writing. So, for lack of a better word, he kind of introduced a bit of a Western style to the open mic itself.
Okay, so Sam, how did you personally get started in comedy? How far back was this?
I lost a bet in Gotcha. No, I had a buddy who was friends. He surfed with another guy, Rob, who I shouted out earlier. So he wanted to start this real comedy open mic, and I had talked to my roommate about doing comedy. So Rob just messaged me one day, and he was like, I heard you like to tell jokes. Come out and tell jokes. And of course, I was like, no, I'll go and watch the first one. But he just got on me. He was like, no, dude, I'll tell everyone it's your first time. The audience will support you. You got to do it. And I was unemployed at the time, so I was like, all right, let's do it. I talked myself into it, and my friends were pumped me up, go do it. And I showed up, and I was like, all right, what order am I in the lineup? He's like, all right, well, it's me, then you, and it's me again. We're the only comics. I was like, oh no. He's like, how much time do you have?
Sandwich.
I was like, I think I have 10 minutes. He's like, you could see his eyes, you have 2 minutes. And I was like, I think I got 10. I had 2. I had 2 minutes. And I got up and I got one laugh my first time. It was at Black Dog in Kaohsiung. And I loved it. Right from then I was like, well, I'm going to do this. And I was so lucky that I was met this guy, Rob, who was obsessed. He had a surf van. But I had another friend of mine in Kaohsiung, Tommy, build us a stage, and we would throw the stage in his van, and we would drive around. We'd spend our weekends. We'd Facebook message bars in different cities, and we'd just go pull up and do shows if they'd have us in there. We'd bring our own stage. We'd we got it. We got the stage rolled out, and that's what we did for a year. Our goal was to do 100 shows in a year, and we hit that in the year. And so, that was a huge. That was when I was okay, I never want this to not be part of my life, basically.
Yeah. Well, when I first met you, I thought you had been forged in the fires of Deep City, New York or something, comedy clubs. But
no,
you started
never.
Here in Taiwan.
Here in Taiwan, yeah. And then the first time I kind of got a pop and knew that I could do a little bit better. I've been doing comedy about a year, and I got accepted to the Hong Kong International Comedy Fest, which was the biggest festival in Asia at the time. And it's 30 comics. You do 3 nights, and each night the top 3 advance to the finals. And I finished third in my night, and I made it to the finals my first year doing it. And my goal going over there was I just didn't want to be obviously the worst. I was if I can just hang with these guys.
If I can look at someone else and say he's worse than me.
Yeah, or even just maybe it's close, even if it was just he wasn't totally obvious. I didn't get boot no tomatoes thrown or whatever like that. And the finals is a 500-person room, which was I can't even tell you how many times bigger than the biggest show I'd done at that point. And I did all right. I mean, I didn't place top 3, but I made it to the finals, and I looked like I belonged there. And that's when I realized oh, okay, for what's going on over here, I feel a lot more confident about my place. And doing that festival exposed me to people who book shows around Asia, and that's what let me get started doing shows in the region, basically.
So another huge achievement that you can add to your list is that you started 2-3, was it in 2019?
Yeah, we opened it in 2019.
And so you've had a wild ride through the pandemic.
Yeah, we hit it right at the beginning. We were can't wait for our first international act. Oh, no, wait.
Oh,
never.
no.
It's never going to happen. Yeah, we had our first international act booked. Andy Curtin, a hilarious comic at the time, was in Hong Kong. He's in Australia now. He was going to come over and do a show in English and Chinese. And then of course, COVID hit.
So what did you learn from doing open mic hosting and shows over the internet on Zoom during the pandemic? When we had the epidemic here last year during it was May 2021, you were hosting shows on a big old Zoom call.
Big Zoom call,
it's kind of like doing one-handed push-ups. You know how to do a normal comedy show, then you have to do it with crutches.
That's a good analogy. Yeah. I actually, it reminds me, I think I still have to cancel my Zoom subscription. I don't think we're going back online anytime soon. So
if nothing else got done today,
I'm gonna check that box
money,
off. Yeah, geez, $12 a month still running, man. So the Zoom it reminded me how much I love live comedy. Honestly, it was such a and shout out to the comics who have been continuing to do it, who did it for years longer. It's very tough. The delay, there's things you can learn from it. You can still write, you can still tell jokes. Like you said, it's better than no comedy. but it doesn't compare at all to actually being in front of an audience live. That's the reason you do comedy, for that.
So I guess finishing up, 2-3 also hosts a lot of other shows. You guys are doing a lot of stuff, traditional theater performances. You have improv. You even have like drunk Shakespeare and drag shows. Do you see even more performance genres on the horizon, or
probably one of the biggest we're kind of excited for is we upgraded our stereo and sound system internally recently, and just started experimenting with having some live music and bands in the space, because realized that room can also be a great like kind of listening room, because it's separate from the bar. And the bands we've had great feedback so far. So looking to incorporate a little of that, maybe like early comedy shows and then DJs staying till later with a more of a lounge kind of atmosphere. So definitely live music is one thing we're looking to add. But the biggest thing on the horizon for us is when international travel opens back up. We have the biggest comedy club in Asia when that opens up again. And we are well positioned to take advantage of that. There's gonna be lots of opportunities for live performance at venues larger than ours, with big comedy stars coming in. I know a lot of promotional companies are already working on contracts for people coming in. I think that once you see the quarantine drop, you're gonna be surprised by the quality of international comedy that's gonna be coming to Taiwan. And 2-3, I think, is going to be at the center of that.
So last question is pretty general, but how do you feel about the future of stand-up in Taipei, in Taiwan?
I mean, tremendous. I mean, touching on it like briefly, the future, especially for the Chinese language, is the sky's the limit there. The popularity of it rising, and again, the opportunity for comics who are interested to get on stage multiple times a week is going to breed a generation of comics who have more stage time than any of the comics that we're seeing now who are kind of in their prime. So you would think it's only going to get better. Also, you're seeing a lot of these different companies, who are investing money into stand-up and also stand-up adjacent things like news channels, and you're seeing all this energy, and as that energy comes and as the eyeballs come on it, you get money and advertising involved in it as well. So I think it's gonna absolutely boom. For English, when the borders open back up, we're really well positioned to be there. We'll always be a part of it, but especially for Chinese language comedy, the sky's the limit. Yeah.
And anything else to finish off that you'd like to say to the people of Taiwan? Any plugs?
Come check out 2-3 Comedy. Don't be scared. Come on down. It's Linson Bay, but it's the nice part of Linson Bay. We're near TGI Fridays. It's nice. So come on, check us out. 7 nights a week.
All right, 2-3 Comedy. This is Sam Yarbs. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. This has been Taiwan Talk. Until next time, I'm Trevor Tortomasi on ICRT FM 100.